grow the majority of our hops. We do buy from 50 or 43 additional allied growers. So we're at about 51 hop farms that we grow from. Some key data points: we harvested 39.8 million pounds of hops and processed them, which is 38% of the US hop crop. 15 grower owners and 36 allied growers, very important to us. I'm going to start with a lot lookup tool. You can find this on our website or our free app, which is in the App Store. Brewers use this. You can use this if you're home brewing. You basically type in your lot number, which would be the P91-BIU-SIM3020, and it'll pull up our C of A, or certificate of analysis. And this is where you can see, for this lot of hops, the alpha acid percentage, beta acid storage index, all the oil contents. And we'll kind of go through some of these and which ones are kind of key to look at and what brewers kind of look for when they're using these hops, and also when they're selecting these hops in September. Our larger brewer customers that buy significant pounds qualify to come to Yakima, and they will evaluate hops from different farms, and they'll pick the lots that they want. We allocate those lots to them, and that's what they would brew with for the year. So a brewer that comes to select Citra is going to have in his mind, like, kind of with these oil contents, what they're looking for in that variety. We'll start with alpha acids. A little disclaimer: I'm not a hop chemist. We do have some on our team, and my email will be on the last slide. So I encourage you, if you want to deep dive into any of these topics, definitely feel free to send me an email, and I will find you the answer. But we'll just kind of do a general overview. Alpha acids, very important to the brewing process. They're isomerized in the boil, and that's where your IBUs or your bitterness comes from. They're going to add bitterness to the beer, some yeast enhancement, some aseptic type properties, and it's going to be very key to an accurate recipe formation is to know your alpha acids percentage in your hops that you're using. The humulone is the main alpha acid, and it's going to be 20 to 50% of the alpha acids in the hop, and it's going to vary across varieties. So it's not going to be, pending varieties, this number is going to change. Cohumulone also going to vary across varieties, and it's going to be 20 to 50% of the alpha acids as well. Adhumulone is going to be 10 to 15%, and it's going to be pretty consistent across varieties. And the post and pre-humulone play a very, very minor role in the process, and they're there in small amounts. One negative is reaction with light and riboflavin in the malt produces that light struck skunky aroma, which is why you see brewers using the dark amber glass for their packaging. Cohumulone, one of the 5 alpha acid analogs in hop resin. Little technical here, kind of what I went over. The C of A's will show a cohumulone percentage. A lot of brewers believe it can provide a rough, harsher quality bitterness. So I know brewers will look at that cohumulone level and kind of prefer a lower percent for their bittering hop. Pato being to the far right, kind of a newer bittering variety, and I think it kind of imparts a kind of a milder bitterness. Higher cohumulone values make for a better utilization rate for isomerization and solubility. And a lot of our advanced products, we have a lot of hop advanced products that we sell to large breweries. They can be things like foam or head retention, isomerized hot products you could add post hot side. A lot of these we don't sell to craft breweries, but it plays a role in some of the advanced products that we have. Beta acids contribute a volatile aroma property, but no real bitterness, and they do not require the presence of heat to show an impact. They break down over time and can change a beer that is stored or lagered, creating bitterness from oxidation. So this is something to consider if you're brewing a lager or a style of beer that's going to have a long residence time in the tank, to just kind of pay attention to the beta acids. I have 4 different varieties that could be used in lagered beer. And if you notice, the alpha acid percentages of these, are going to range from 3 all the way up to 13. And we like to kind of think of the ratio of alpha acid to beta. Pacific Crest in the upper left is a blend that we did, and we hit a pretty low percentage here for the beta acids at 3 versus a lemon at 4.5. Crystal jumps up to 8. So it is a factor to look at if you're making a lager recipe or a pilsner or something that's going to age for a period of time to kind of minimize that bitterness that can arise over time. We all know aging beer is not an ideal situation for a brewer. Longer fermentation time and storage, you can lose some alpha acid bitterness and gain some perceived harsh beta bitterness. So just having aware of the ratio of alpha acid to beta acid is something that you could consider if you're making a lager recipe. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the hop varieties used in the Dear Mama brew. Citra is our #1 aroma hop at the moment. Kind of dominates a lot of the hop contracts that I'm doing. And I just call it a sledgehammer for IPA. It's something you can put in a pale ale or an IPA, and it just expresses so well. It's just so popular in the market. And we actually have limited availability in the current market, which is why brewers are often racing early in the year to contract it for the next. Sabro is one of our newer varieties, released in 2018. It's a Neo-Mexicanus variety, meaning it originated in the American West. A lot of these varieties of the New Mexicanus heritage came out of New Mexico, and they've been described as having long spindle leaves similar to cannabis. I get a lot of coconut, pina colada. It's this high oil content, very unique. And I think Murph at BlackStack's become really, really good at figuring out how to use Sabro in his hazy beers and just get that tropical note to come through. And it's been immensely popular since it was released in 2018. There's a little chart that shows you where the aroma attributes kind of fall for Sabro. You can see tropical fruit and citrus kind of leaning heavily that way. A little list of the total oils. When you look at total oils, three is a real high number, 3%. 1% would be lower, and then as you go down through here, it's just a very oil dominant hop, very unique. Triumph hop was used in that beer as well. It came out of the USDA Elite experimental line, and it was just released in 2019. And I looked into it, and all of the Triumph we received was grown by Sodbuster Farms in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, and he is one of our grower owners. One of my favorite growers. I think he grows amazing Citra every year. And Triumph is going to have, some noble type character with hints of peach, lime, pine, and spice. And I included a little diagram here that kind of shows you what goes into crossing these varieties and coming up with a new variety. So you can kind of see it was a cross of Nugget and a USDA experimental line. But then if you backtrack or mouse that line back, you can see that quite a bit goes into coming up with a new variety. Azacca was also used, was originally bred by the American Dwarf Hop Association, which kind of focused on growing dwarf and low trellis plants. And I think since they've kind of moved into being a conventional hop breeding company. But it was released in 2013. And it's a very popular variety as well. I know Murphy uses a lot of it in his beers. He was telling me, very, very popular hop for him. Kind of move into dry hopping. Dry hopping is the addition of hops to the cold side of the brewing process. It's been around for centuries, and it's going to be where you're adding hops, after boil, there's no heat. Adding to your fermenter, you're going to be adding aromas, you're going to be adding oils, and you're going to be adding some perceived bitterness, but you're not adding, quote, IBUs or actual bitterness because there's no heat there. This is super interesting to me. I got excited when I saw this slide. We came up with a hop blend called Try 2304, and it's a cryo hop blend. And our cryo product is a process where we basically freeze the hop cone and extract the lupulin glands, and then kind of form that into a pellet. So when that's being used, you're using less vegetal matter and kind of all of the good stuff, all the oils and the lupulin glands. So we came up with this blend, and we tried to target compounds that would maximize biotransformation. And we'll get into that on a future slide. But this kind of shows the upper left chart is just the raw hop sensory data. So this would just be like a rub and sniff of the pellet, not in beer. The upper right is we added this cryo mix to just whirlpool only. The bottom left, we added to beer during active fermentation. So I would think around day 3. And then the lower right is post-fermentation dry hop, meaning fermentation is complete probably around day 7. And we go to the next slide where they're overlaid. And you can see the active fermentation dry hop and the biotransformative effect, much greater area within that red area in the floral citrus tropical range. So choosing hops that have elevated geraniol, linalool, 3-MH, which we'll talk about, you can kind of get ahead of the game here. And if you're looking for these citrusy tropical notes, timing a dry hop can be super important. It's a little summary here, dry hop timing. And you can kind of see within the whirlpool, lemon, apple, grapefruit, rose, sweet cream, mid-firm dry hop, grapefruit, orange, peach, mango, apple, kind of going more into that tropical and away from the floral, and then the post-firm dry hop, peach, banana, mango, orange, and passion fruit. Essential oil aromas, so this is kind of like a little summary of what you might see on that C of A of all those oil compounds. Hydrocarbons, myrcene, caryophyllene, humulene, and farnesene. Usually these aren't things you're going to be looking for in an IPA. Could play roles in lagers and pilsners. The oxygenated hydrocarbons, linalool. Linalool is something that I hear brewers always talking about, especially with Citra. Can be described as Fruit Loops, Fruity Pebbles, floral, geraniol being rose and geranium, and beta pinene being citrus and piney. And then some of these sulfur compounds we'll get into as well. It's kind of a little summary of linalool, and I think this is cool. You can see at the bottom kind of a list of a lot of varieties and then their linalool content. Again, sometimes described as Fruit Loops, Fruity Pebbles. It's actually used in many fragrances and flavorings outside of beer, and it really survives the brewing process. It's something that can be resistant to heat and the actual fermentation process. Some of the compounds get volatilized off and don't actually express in the final beer. Sulfur-bearing compounds, 3 types of current that are relevant. There's sulfides, there's thioesters, and they're polyfunctional thiols. These require specialized equipment to detect, and we've actually added onto our GCMS abilities to actually detect some of these in hops, and we're starting this harvest year, we'll be testing for some of these. Sulfites are very unpleasant. That's kind of why you want a vigorous boil in your process to kind of volatilize off some of these. They're in low concentrations in hops. You're gonna get most of it from malt. So DMS being the prime example, dimethyl sulfate. If you've ever had Rolling Rock beer, it's just a DMS bomb to me. Cooked corn, cream corn, vegetal, things that we normally don't want in finished beer. Thioesters, anytime you see 8 at the end of the word, it equals ester. Present in moderate concentrations, but our aroma detection is pretty low. So the human nose can detect a pretty low level in the parts per billion. So it's something definitely want to pay attention to. It's not totally clear how hops interact with this. High concentrations, it doesn't mean a hop's not useful. I believe a lot of this can be derived from yeast health and your quality of malt, if there's bacteria present, fermentation temperature. etc. But these are mostly things that I consider to be also not pleasant. Polyfunctional thiols, sometimes called mercaptans. And this is pretty interesting in that it's like maybe makes up 1% of what's in a hop, but we can detect it in parts per trillion. So it plays a big role and can have a big impact in your beer. Generally considered to contribute pleasant aromas contained in tropical fruits, can be bound to amino acids released by yeast enzymes believed to be stored in cell vacuoles. For mmp, also sometimes referred to as 4-MSP, kind of comes from the wine industry. Nelson Sauvin hop variety, very high levels of 4-MMP, kind of caddy aroma at high concentrations. Something we currently don't test for. It's pretty interesting to note that it's not found in European hops, and a lot of people believe there's some copper used either in processing or in fertilizers that kind of strip this out. Something I'm not that concerned about. 3-MH is very important. 3-mercaptohexanol. It's contained in hops and malt. This is dominant grapefruit, and it plays a role in biotransformation. And this is something that we will be testing for and have been testing for starting this past harvest year. It's very durable. It survives into the beer. The biotransformation of 3-MH to 3-MHA really hits that grapefruit passion fruit note. So this is kind of interesting for brewers to also think about this when they're looking at hops that they want to add early during active fermentation to kind of maximize biotransformation. So biotransformation, I'm sure you've all heard of it. Considerations different doesn't always mean better. Yeast plays a big role. We all know that London Ale3 strains are very popular for hazy IPAs, but also what strains work with what compounds. So basically yeast takes a compound, modifies it and changes it, and how that hop then expressed in the beer changes. We're gonna look for high levels of monoterpene alcohols, being linalool, geraniol, beta-pinene. You can see that 3-MH becomes 3-MHA. Geraniol can become citronellol. Put that with linalool, you get this bright lime citrus note. So key takeaway, 3-MH, geraniol, and linalool. Look for those in your hop varieties to maximize biotransformation and really get those fruity citrus flavors in your hazy IPAs. Can create some yeast handling challenges. Anytime you dry hop, say day 3 for fermentation, you basically eliminated that fermenter vessel as a source for yeast cropping or yeast harvest. So breweries that make a lot of hazy IPAs can run into problems where they don't have a good harvest tank for their yeast. And also there's some safety issues. Dry hopping an actively fermenting tank can cause gushers. The hops hit the CO2 and you have nucleation points, and it can quickly gush out the top. Murph told me they have a 6-inch butterfly valve they put on top of the tank, and then they put a cone on top of that that holds 11 pounds of hops, and our hops come in 11-pound bags. And that butterfly valve, they could shut that quickly if the tank starts to gush, because if not, it goes everywhere. And there's some videos online if you're interested to see some panicked brewers trying to put a clamp back on top of the tank quickly. This is probably my favorite slide of the presentation. It kind of summarizes the compounds that I discussed, and we call them, quote, survivables. And these are things that are going to be in these varieties that are going to survive or have a better chance of surviving heat, being the boil, and also fermentation. And it kind of is the framework for our future experimental design. And it's a lot to unpack if you look at this, but Idaho 7 on the left, we're bullish on the future of that hop. Just loads of aroma potential. It's got a balanced breakdown of these compounds. It's also now being grown in Washington State. If you look at Laurel, it's our biggest linalool hop. Sabro, very balanced, high oil content, very pungent. I feel like Sabro is something you can even smell in the field. You go into a field, you can almost smell that coconut. It's very rare to me to be able to smell anything in a hop field because the hops have not yet been kilned and dried, but it's just so pungent and so unique. Variety HPC 692 is an experimental variety that is very, very far along in the process, and it has huge geraniol content, pink aroma, grapefruit notes. And I feel like this is probably one of there's 2 in our system that are probably next to go to market. This has great potential for biotransformation, and it can stand alone in a beer, with the pink grapefruit aroma notes. So takeaway from this is higher on the left side of this chart is going to be, there's just more there to survive into the beer. To the right doesn't mean that it doesn't have a use. It just maybe you want to use Sriracha's cluster Azaka post-fermentation addition. But this is something that every brewer I've shown gets super excited to look at it. Yeah, so this is something that we're going to get out there. We're going to share that cryo blend that I spoke about, where we saw that 2 overlaid charts fell to the left of Idaho 7 when we actually lined it up. So the goal of that particular cryo hop blend was to hit high concentrations of these compounds. So 3MH is that other compound I mentioned that we look at. And this graph has a long tail. And if you look, these are mostly high alpha percentage hops or bittering hops. It's kind of interesting that I find these to not be the most aromatic hops at the left. But could these be incorporated into a blend component? If you look at the next slide, some of these are on here containing thioesters, which is unpleasant. So you're getting a little bit of both, and that's up to the brewer then to figure out how do we want to utilize these hops in the process, where do we want to add them? Is there potential for some of these to have high potential for biotransformation, but also they're kind of carrying some of this potential vegetal notes with it. We basically are just looking to try to avoid bad things in beer, potential for vegetal aromas. This is something I feel like we'll flush out with some more research, but again, very interesting. And then to kind of sum it up, why should we care about this? Kind of a buzzword, but synergy. Taking hops like linalool that's high in, or taking hops like laurel, which is very high in linalool, and standing on its own, it's lemongrass, it's not going to be a hop that blows you away. But brewers want high linalool and citra, and we've found that putting laurel with citra, it's an amazing combination. So one of my coworkers calls it flavor pop technology. It's sort of an inside joke, but it's kind of true. It's like, how can we use these hops together so that the parts come together to make this, the sum of them is way greater than the parts. Again, feeding it back to the brewers, how they make decisions on what varieties they're breeding, what varieties get expanded acreage, and then how do they play into the future of brewing. All these things can kind of feed into our experimental design, and then we link that to the breeding program. And it's pretty exciting to see that as hop growers and a hop supplier, that we're hopefully coming up with new products that can maximize hop aroma and expression in final beer. So that's what I had. This is my email. Feel free to send me emails. Any questions you have on basically anything hop related, I'll get back to you and try to come up with answers. If you have, questions on recipes, what hops to choose where, I don't have all the answers, but definitely we have a team of people that have worked in the brewing industry, have been brewers, have been in labs. We can kind of get together and give you hopefully some good advice. So Rose, do you want to see if there's questions or?
Yeah, so I'm not seeing any open questions right now, but I did have a question of my own. Back when you were talking about biotransformation, it kind of something you said about like hop addition timing struck a chord with me. Has YCH done any sensory experiments comparing, say, the addition of a dry hop at 72 hours into active fermentation versus 5 or 6 days, before a beer is crashed, but while yeast is still alive and active?
I think so. With dry hopping, there's not a playbook. A lot of it is experimentation and note taking and trial and error. But I just did a webinar with some brewers in India, and it's very basic. And one of the things I started with was having just 3-day contact time at maximum. Beyond that, you're not doing any good. And then it's going to be like, well, are you going to do your dry hop in 2 charges or in 1? You could do your quote biotransformative potential hops, early, drop those out after 3 days, do another addition post firm. We have noticed that two additions tends to be better than 1. So if you're adding the same amount of pounds, but you split it into 2. But as far as comparing like the same variety early on during active versus post, you'll definitely it won't be the same beer. And again, it depends on the variety and what compounds are in that variety. I'm not sure I answered your question, but.
No, that's okay. I know there's like a lot of variables involved. It seemed like it'd be cool to compare like right on an early active fermentation versus after.
Yeah, I know we've done that. I just don't have it in front of me.
Totally.
That's something I could definitely follow up on. A lot of questions revolve around temperature. Obviously the warmer you dry hop, the more extraction you get. A lot of it, for me as a former brewer, a lot of it revolved around harvesting yeast. I drop the tank to 60, harvest my yeast, but then I'm dry hopping at 60 Fahrenheit instead of fermentation temperature of 68 or 72. So it depends on your process, but I know for sure that it won't be the same beer if you are dry hopping at day 3 versus day 7.
Thank you. We do have a question from Murphy. He is asking, when are Professor Steve's office hours?
Oh man, all the time. I'm always on. I did a webinar with Murph, a one-on-one a couple weeks ago. It was pretty fun. We drank a beer together.
Nice.
Any other questions?
Oh yeah, this one's coming from Paige. Does Yakima provide hops in formats other than pellets and cryo, such as hop oil or extracts?
We do have hop extracts. We have them with single varietals, so you could get, Citra, Cascade, Mosaic. They're for hot side additions, so mostly kettle. A lot of breweries are using Pato, which is the one of the high alpha varieties I mentioned for just like their early bittering additions, and then just dry hopping a lot in the whirlpools. We sell whole cone hops. We don't currently have a post hot side addition. Like a lot of brewers call it top note. So like something you could add to kind of boost up a little bit of hop aroma. Everything we have is meant to be hot side. It doesn't really want to mix well. Like if you try to add it to a fermenter or bright tank, it would just kind of blob into the bottom. That's something I think we're working on. Yeah, we do have hop oil products, and I'm seeing when I started in the brewing industry in '08, craft brewers were kind of really against it, or the stigma was there to like, well, we don't use hop oils. But I'm seeing more and more craft brewers very receptive to it. So yeah, something that we definitely sell.
Sorry, meant to unmute, not start video. So when you're talking about hop oils, like pure essential oil extracts, basically?
Yeah, I'm talking about, yes, like CO2 extract to be used. It's not isomerized, so you'd have to add it to hot side again. There are products that are isomerized that you could add to your fermenter to add IBU. And a lot of them don't really add a lot of aroma. I had some brewers using it for sour beers where they're just like, I just want like a little bit of bitterness, but I don't want to put any hops into my souring process, which would kind of inhibit it. It's very hard to dose. So I don't sell a lot of it to craft breweries. If anyone buys it, it's usually like the very big regional crafts or the macro breweries buy it. Again, they're kind of set up to more easily be able to dose it into their process without, put it this way, it's very easy to ruin a tank of beer by over adding it. So honestly, I don't sell a lot of the, like what I call them quote advanced products to craft breweries. But we do sell the basic CO2 extract, which is kind of like replacing using T90s in your boil. We have a calculator that you would use to say, my recipe calls for X amount of T90. It's a quick equivalent. And so we sell the extract in grams of alpha. So a small can would be, there's 150 grams of alpha in the can. There's a 300 gram of alpha can. So basically the brewer would take the recipe, a T90 addition, convert it to how many grams of alpha do I need? And they're going to say, I need 1 can, I need 1.5 cans. And then that would kind of translate into basically how many IBUs they're going to get. So we kind of work, when brewers first buy it, we kind of help them through with how to add it, and then basically make sure we're converting accurately the T90 addition so that their IBUs are going to stay consistent.
Thank you.
What would be the main factor which determines that a hop variety is good for biotransformation? Linalool, geraniol, 3MH, and then if we go back to that slide I had with the survivables, this slide, basically these compounds. So Mosaic, Citra, Idaho 7, the Bravos in there, Millennium, Simcoe. These are going to be the ones that would have the most potential, I'll put it that way. Again, it's going to depend on your yeast strain, when you dry hop, but at least if you're making a recipe and you want biotransformation, to the left of this chart is going to be a great place to start.
So I kind of a follow-up question, looking at the chart here. So we've heard that Idaho 7, Laurel, other hops that are high in geraniol, or I'm sorry, high in linalool are going to be advantageous for biotransformation. But looking over here, it looks like, is that Liberty that also looks like it has a high range, but we haven't heard so much about that as being like a popular hop for double hop IPA.
Which one? I missed it.
Oh, it looks like it's in between Nugget and one with the abbreviation ELD.
Liberty?
Yeah, is that?
Yeah. Liberty is that's a variety. Honestly, I don't know that much about. It's not well rounded, but you're right. It does have a ton of linalool in it, so it'd be interesting to actually. What I would like to see is incorporating that into a blend and see what happens. Some of these are surprising, like Crystal to me. I always liked Crystal, but it's not something that was always top of mind. With the CRY, loads of potential there as well.
All right. Oh, sorry.
No, I see another question. What are the suggested ways to avoid unwanted flavors vegetal when using hops that it may have? Quite honestly, our cryo product, because we've removed the brack leaf. If you're doing big dry hops, or I say big dry hop loads, or compared to even 5 years ago, we're using 4 times the dry hopping rate. Keeping that dry hop residence time to 3 days, and not 5 or not 7. You're going to kind of cut down on that vegetal expression. Kind of go off of the topic a little bit, but if you've heard of the term hop creep, which is basically restarting fermentation after dry hopping, the brack leaf contains enzymes which can further break down some of the non-fermentable sugars into smaller chains that can then be fermented. So basically, it's it might drop a Play-Doh and a half after you think you're finished. Using something like the cryo product, where we've taken that part of the hop away, can kind of really cut down on the potential for that to happen. Cut down on some of this potential vegetal notes, bump your yield up because there's less material in there to kind of soak beer up. Yeah, I would say definitely stick to that 3-day contact time with the beer. Picking varieties that aren't, obviously super high in polyphenols. Like, don't dry hop with a noble hop. Kind of where I'd start. Looking at the survivables chart, HPC 522 has a high percentage of linalool. Is there a way to capitalize on this high ratio, timing, and temperature and amplify the impact? 522, honestly, is one I'm not super familiar with. I haven't brewed with it. Shoot me an email and I'll get back to you on that variety, what the descriptors are, and where that hop would probably be best used, but it does have a very high linalool level. No worries. Yeah, I mean, curious customer, that's fine. I'm curious now too. I work with these hops and there's the experimental numbers get sometimes in my head, I get confused which ones are which. 472 is a sister of Sabro. It's right next to 522. Kind of carries a little bit more of a woody note, but it's been a very popular hop.
All right, do you have any final questions or comments out there? Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Steve. We really appreciate it. I learned a lot. I'm really glad that you could all join us for this. Feel free to follow Witch Hunt on social media or sign up for our emails. Visit our website, witchhuntmpls.org, and you can view this webinar probably tomorrow once we get it posted. So yeah, oh, looks like we have, oh, you're welcome, Andy. Cool.
Well, thank you, everyone. And Murph, definitely save me a beer. Save me one of these beers for next time I visit. I'll be really excited to try it.